The implications of this could be quite profound, obviously. Less obvious is, what are we going to do about it? Are we, in fact, going to assure that Americans are on the moon again first, and that they are equipped and with the authority to defend the place against what the Chinese have in mind? A topic that we will be exploring in detail in the course of the program. I'm very pleased that, as we often do, we have some contributions from two of our preeminent intelligence veterans. Captain James Fennell, United States Navy retired, a duty expert on all things having to do with the threat from China, has made some comments in connection with our Securing America television program on Real America's Voice, and graciously agreed that we might excerpt parts of them for this purpose. Captain Fennell is not only a man who served in uniform in the intelligence branch of the Navy, rising through the ranks to the position of Chief of Intelligence and Information Operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. But in his post-Navy career, he has rendered incalculable service by continuing to raise the alarm about what the Chinese Communist Party and its military, the People's Liberation Army, are up to, including in the high frontier, as it's known. He is the co-author with Dr. Bradley Thayer of a very important book, Embracing Communist China, and he contributes frequently to American Greatness, and I commend to you his writings there. We're going to take a clip from Captain Fennell to kick off this program. Let's go to it now.
It seems clear to us who follow China that everything that the Chinese Communist Party does, there is a military PLA component to it. If you go back just 3 years ago in the 2023 report to Congress by the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, they stated, quote, "China seeks to control access to the moon for strategic aims," unquote. That's from 2023, from during the Biden years, not very hard on China, but they were very clear about that. And then the report went on to say they seek to accomplish this first by dominating the cislunar domain, the space between Earth and the moon. And that's important because between the Earth and the moon is where all of our satellites are, and everyone else's satellites. And in those low Earth orbits, this is where we have our banking institutions and communications networks, and the ability of our military to be able to see and know where the enemy is, like what we're doing right now in this conflict in Operation Epic Fury in Iran. And so the risk has always been that China, once they get up into space, their real goal is to get, as Rick Fisher, our friend, says, the high ground, to be able to have this kind of dominating position from the moon, to be able to create weapon systems that will be able to take out our satellites, take out our communications, and disable us. And so that's why this is really important. I mean, there's a history with our space program in NASA and the treaties that go back to the 60s and the Artemis Accords. There's all this language about, the international community has taken this high-minded notion that space will be unweaponized. There will be no military application in space. So that's what they're ardent believers in that. It's a religious fervor. And so they are essentially throttling the United States' national security interest because of this utopian viewpoint of how space will be. And so China doesn't have any of that, and they're going to do what they're going to do. And so the race to get up there, especially if we have a strategy and a plan where we're going to do a number of launches and landings between now and 2029, and they try to get up there before we can actually get a firm base established, who knows what havoc they could do when they're up there. And they were the first ones to go to the dark side of the moon, so they've got a little bit of an advantage there, at least in terms of putting a rover out there and testing what's going on out there and understanding the extreme temperatures and things of that nature. So I know it sounds Cold Warish, it sounds Dr. Strangelove, but if we are not prepared to stay ahead of the Chinese in this domain, they will dominate it, and they will have the ability to control our national security and to put us at great risk. Not just militarily, but they could shut off our banking system. They could shut off our telecommunications so no one can communicate on their handheld devices anymore. There's all sorts of things. Starlink that Elon Musk has, that could be taken out of service. So all kinds of strategic ramifications, none of which are good for us from a regime that has stated that they want to destroy the United States of America and replace it with their system of governance. So I'm very concerned that we don't let up on this now that President Trump kind of kick-started NASA and the space program in 2017 with those Artemis Accords, and maybe shifted the way we procure space vehicles and space systems from a cost-plus approach to a fixed-price approach. And that fixed-price approach drove the private sector and drove literally over 2,000 private sector companies to try to make a profit by doing things faster, better, quicker, cheaper. And that's why we were able to get to where we are right now, is because President Trump unleashed capitalism and the private economy of the American economy on this problem. So it's not a matter of intellect or capability on our side. It's not a matter of we don't have the scientists to do this. It's really a matter of, are we going to be constrained by people that have this near religious belief that we can't militarize space? It's going to be militarized, so we better be prepared for it. Just like every other domain, whether it was the sea, land warfare, wherever we go, the human condition makes it a military domain in some form or fashion. Aviation was the same. Nothing has escaped that in human history, and we'd be foolish to think that space would be any different.
Maybe it's time for us to actually learn from experience and not keep repeating the same mistake over and over. The old expression like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Well, we've kind of seen this playbook before. Not kind of, right? I mean, we know what the Chinese attitude is toward territory, because as of right now, apparently the entire South China Sea belongs to them, right? And they're not just some theoretical thing they drew a line on a map and forgot about it. I mean, for years now, they've been militarizing, creating artificial islands, enlarging islands, building airfields, and now, every other day they're teeing off with the Filipinos down in. Okay, so we know what their attitude is. It belongs to us. Everybody else get the hell out, right? And so we also have seen the playbook in regard to minerals and strategic things like this, right? We let them basically completely dominate rare earth minerals. So now we're in this horrible situation of being in the middle of a war with the Iranians. All of our advanced weaponry is made with these rare earth minerals, and the Chinese effectively have a stranglehold. And the Chinese have been sort of turning the spigot on and off now for some time, letting us feel the pain and relaxing, but just reminding us that they can effectively shut down our military anytime they want, and we're on some crash program now to reopen mines, build mines, get stuff from Australia. Like we saw this coming. You and I have talked about this, and God knows how many people that know a lot more about this particular area than me forever, and yet now we've waited till crisis time. I think it was last year we finally banned Chinese nationals from working in classified programs at NASA. So we've watched the Chinese steal everything, including the kitchen sink. Every time they roll out a new fighter, it's a copy of whatever we just spent $1 billion designing. And we didn't get around to basically yesterday stopping them from looting God knows what from NASA. So there are these Lagrange points, which are points where sort of the gravitational pull of the sun, the moon, and the earth all cancel each other out, and you can place an object and it just remains stationary. So these are, from a strategic standpoint in the context of space, really critical. Well, These guys, the Chinese, already parked a satellite at one of them. I think it's L2, which allows them to communicate to the other side of the moon. Anyway, what I'm saying is this is a really long-term strategic effort on their part to clearly take control of the moon, the ice at the South Pole, which is water. Why is that important? Because you can break it down and produce fuel for rockets, and produce energy, which means deep space exploration, manufacturing in space, everything flows from that. So they're right on the doorstep of claiming all of that for themselves. There's also this helium isotope, H3, I think it is, that potentially is critical for fusion, that has been found in the soil of the moon. And the technology is not quite there yet to use this in fusion reactors, but everybody anticipates it is. And once it happens, this material will be unbelievably important. So here we have the Chinese doing all of this very methodically, long-term basis, to seize control of this high ground, from which, by the way, they can also take out all of our satellites and take down our communication. So, and up until very recently, we've just sort of been allowing it to happen, right? So, glad to see now with the Artemis program we are moving. But yeah, this is critical. We should have been moving like this on rare earth minerals at least a decade ago, if not 20 years ago. So we avoid getting into this crisis. So it is most Americans are not paying attention to it. It's unbelievably important to the future of the United States of America.
So bottom line, is it necessary for us to change this playbook and to be putting forward as the leading edge of our moon program a capability to defend the moon against the Chinese, assuming, in fact, we do get there first?
Absolutely. I mean, look, we have to change our complete mindset. I get it that in Star Trek, everybody from every country on Earth is all friends now, and we all fly around the galaxy. But that's science fiction. That's not where we are. The Chinese are not going to the moon because they want to be buddies, friends, advance the cause of humanity. This is simply them continuing doing what we're already seeing them to do on the planet. So we just need to, that's unfortunate. Okay, sorry, it's unfortunate. That's reality. Now let's deal with it. This is a military thing for them. Has nothing to do with peace or, wanting to advance knowledge. And we have to recognize that.
Rick is a man who has been studying closely and writing copiously about the Chinese threat for decades. He is truly one of our country's preeminent experts on the actual character of Chinese programs, military programs in particular, dual-use programs as well. He is a senior fellow with the International Assessment and Strategy Center and the author of China's Military Modernization, Building for Regional and Global Reach. He might have extraterrestrial reach as well, as we will be talking with him about here in this recorded contribution to our program. Let's go to the video with Rick Fisher now.
I'd like to cover basically 3 points. First, our race with China to the moon. Second, our race with China for the moon. And then third, our race with China for the solar system. Our race with China to the moon is well underway. The Chinese this year will be testing an early version of their Long March 10 space launch vehicle. They'll eventually have a reusable version, but the main version will be their first moon-rated space launch vehicle. By 2027, they could be testing the full-size tri-core version of the Long March 10. The Chinese will use 2 Long March 10s to put their people on the moon. They'll be dividing the payload between their moon lander, which will go on 1 Long March 10, and then their manned spaceship called Mengzhou that will go on a second Long March 10. The moon lander, Lanyue, and the Mengzhou will dock in lunar orbit, and then the Lanyue will proceed to the lunar surface. We have seen both models and early test atmospheric test versions of the Lanyue. The Mengzhou may actually fly to the Chinese space station later this year in an unmanned test. But manned tests will happen. The Lanyue moon lander will be tested in low Earth orbit, and all of this will be done with great fanfare. The Chinese want to get to the moon, they say, by 2030. And it is possible they may actually get there by 2029. They have the advantage of a lighter, lower weight architecture. They're basically trying to accomplish an Apollo mission with some Soviet inspirations. And I'll get to that in my second point, which is the race for the moon. Even if the Chinese were to beat the United States back to the moon, if for whatever reason, war on Earth that the Chinese start, we're not able to fund our NASA program to get to the moon by 2028, we can bear that loss, if you will, because the real race is the race for the moon, the race to get there and occupy strategic points on the moon to ensure that our 61 Artemis partners and our own astronauts can ensure our access to the moon. NASA explained about 4 weeks ago that they will be spending $30 billion over the course of 10 years, mounting about 79 lunar space launches, 72 lunar landings. And this is indeed a blessing of leadership. Donald Trump, since his first term, has been focused on getting America back to the moon. He understands the geopolitical ramifications of that quest. He understands that getting to the moon is the best way to ensure we can continue to get to the moon. It's the best way to ensure that the moon is not exploited to try to control the Earth-Moon system, or at least that we can do what the Chinese are doing. And once we start getting to the moon, once we both start building our moon bases, the race for the moon is going to become complicated because of China's use of dual-use technologies. Right from the get-go, the first Chinese landing on the moon is going to be an opportunity to bomb the moon. Their Lanyue moon lander uses 2 stages, the manned lander and then a very large propulsion module. The propulsion module is inspired by early Soviet moon lander designs. And the propulsion module is going to sustain the lander in lunar orbit for a number of weeks or months before the manned capsule arrives. But on the way down to the moon, the propulsion module is going to provide most of that deceleration thrust. But at some point, not too far above the moon lander and the propulsion module will separate, and the propulsion module will crash into the lunar surface. Now, there are various estimates from 4 to 12 kilometers away from the landing of the moon lander where this propulsion module crashes. But look, accidents happen. And NASA told us about a month ago that the South Pole, the strategic target for China and the United States, is about the size of Virginia. I live in Virginia. And having 5-8-ton propulsion modules flying around over my head is not a comforting thought. And I don't think our astronauts on the moon will take much comfort in that as well. So either we agree with the Chinese to deconflict all this, or we start taking our own dual-use systems to the moon, like mining lasers that can also be used to damage or shoot down these errant propulsion modules. Now, the race doesn't stop at the moon, as I mentioned. In 2023, the Chinese Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, their main space launcher and moon lander corporation, revealed that for the previous 3 years, it had been assembling a 100-year plan to extend China's presence out into the solar system, to Pluto. And by the time they get there, nuclear propulsion will be usefully developed, and getting to Mars in less than 6 months, or actually achieving speeds sufficient to begin early galactic, not galactic, but out to the nearest star at least. Those sorts of missions are conceivable. So perhaps not in my lifetime, but perhaps within the lifetime of my kids. So the Chinese understand that control of the moon is key to military superiority on Earth. They understand that getting to Mars in substantial form just like getting to the moon in substantial form is key to controlling access to that body. And then from there on into the solar system, Saturn, the moons of Jupiter, and beyond. So we're in this race. As long as the Chinese Communist Party exists, the United States is going to be challenged beyond low Earth orbit. And we are very lucky that Donald Trump understands this, has decided to prepare the United States as best he can within the remainder of his term. All of this is designed to be uncancelable. Remember, Barack Obama in 2010 canceled George Bush's moon program, effectively giving China a 10-year period to catch up. We cannot make that mistake again. And again, we must be very grateful for the leadership of President Trump in space.
Well, thank you so much, Frank. I would just say that there has been a excellent groundwork laid for this discussion right across the board with Jim Fennell and Sam Faddis and Rick Fisher, true national security experts who can speak to the weapon systems, who can speak to the specifics. I'm a little more of a generalist on space, seeing I'm a finance guy at the end of the day, but I've taken a strong interest in this particular competition, and of course the Chinese in space more broadly. You're quite right that we're now in our 9th space security conference in Prague, and it's been held elsewhere from Tokyo to Washington. But the point is, this is a series of conferences with 200 of our leading military, government, and private sector NGO representatives. So we're very pleased that we've had this opportunity to once a year refresh folks' understanding of the stakes and the perils along the lines that have been already discussed today. I particularly was pleased that Sam Faddis raised the South China Sea. This is the most applicable example or model of what we can expect in the event of losing the moon race. I don't think it is the end of the world, as Rick Fisher said. This isn't going to be a winner-take-all operation, thank goodness, because I am very concerned about the timelines of our own ascent or reascent to the moon and that of the Chinese. But I do know that if they get there first, they'll plant themselves in the most strategic of locales. One epicenter of that is the Shackleton Crater, known for its likely possession of ice and water, which will be obviously fundamental to not only habitating the moon, but also our plans to use the moon as a springboard for other space endeavors. So that said, we do need to remember the characteristics of the South China Sea, which is a Chinese flag planted in that case on ground that they themselves dredged and built from the sea, and said from now on, of course, in these man-made illegal islands that are interspersed in the Spratleys, Paracels, and so forth in the South China Sea, that we now have to seek their permission to transit that sea, which covers some $5 trillion in annual trade, and simply declare it so. This is a fiction that's been knocked down by international tribunals, as you know, but the Chinese don't care about that. They care about might is right, and if they've got the military systems in place, they'll dictate the terms. Thank you very much. And so we'll be looking to the Chinese for permission to orbit, land on, or operate on the moon, particularly its most strategic territories. They may care less if we head off into a barren wasteland somewhere else on the moon, but certainly not in those strategic locales. So I think we have to be very concerned about the timeline here. I think it's inevitable what the Chinese will do. This is a military mission. The entire Chinese space program is under the People's Liberation Army. That's a fact. Every Chinese company doing business in the space arena is beholden to them and reports to them. The Chinese are now out. We've been researching this for 15 years now at the Prague Security Studies Institute and found that the Chinese have approached 123 countries with international space partnerships, these too good to be true alliances, if you will, that are really designed to offer package deals that are too good to refuse. We'll build your satellite. We'll launch it. We'll build your ground stations. We'll offer you operating personnel. We'll give you 100% financing. We'll train your people. The whole thing is one-stop shopping, except, of course, you'll be using our positioning, navigation, and timing system, PETO, their GPS equivalent, or the Russians with GLONASS, which is theirs. And we'll be doing sole source contracts from now on in terms of supplies of all the vital elements of space equipment and technology. So it really is what we call space sector capture. And I could go on about this, except that there are 800 such transactions underway. There are 22 countries that are already gone, in the sense of utterly dominated by Chinese or Russian, or indeed a combination of the two we found in a number of cases, where the space sectors of these aspiring space nations that don't have the resources themselves to pull this off, that are taking that Chinese poison apple, and they are running with it. So we already are losing our shirts in what I call the ground-based space race. We don't seem to acknowledge that this is a contested environment. It's not just what's going on up there, Frank. It's what's going on here on the ground as well. And they're collecting votes from these countries that they are dominating to take into multilateral fora like the UN COPUOS and other space-based, space-related multilateral fora, where they set standards and norms, where they decide what a space weapon is, or they decide on behavioral norms according to their playbook, which will be deceptive and, of course, designed merely to advance the interest of the Chinese Communist Party and the PLA. So this is a complicated subject. We have to get to the moon first. We have an entire sad chapter that we've been researching that hasn't really seen adequately the light of day, which is the fact that our investment community and our capital markets and private equity funds are paying for a lot of these Chinese PLA-tied space companies, and they're investing in them. They're investing your and my money. 100 million Americans are holding Chinese PLA-tied space companies, courtesy of BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and others. And MSCI and FTSE Russell and the index providers on Wall Street are littered with PLA Chinese companies. So here we are, not just facing the prospect of losing the moon or walking into a militarized situation when we have scientists and geologists and they have hardened Navy SEAL Special Forces equivalents with co-orbital ASATs, direct ascent weapons, possibly even their own lasers. The point is, they are there to win. We are there to explore. I'm afraid that that's not going to work out for us. We have to be there to win. And the greatest urgency we have right now is to recognize that the gentleman's game of space is over, and that we have to roll up our sleeves and get serious about defending the moon, defending our space aspirations. So that would be my clarion call, to the extent that I'm joining with those who frankly know the technical dimensions of it better than I. But I certainly am looking at it from a Wall Street and economic and financial knothole here. And I can tell you it's no prettier. In fact, the irony is quite supreme when you think that we're picking up the tab as insult to injury. So why don't I leave it there, Frank?
I've been thinking about this off and on for the past, 20, almost 25 years. I'm going to kind of nuance the perspective of what we're talking about here in two ways. First, the idea of militarization of outer space. That's always happened. We have GPS. The men who landed on the moon, most of them were members of the military. So the military's always been involved in outer space, and that's not a bad thing. The key point, and in fact, the whole idea of militarization, the term of militarization of outer space, came from the Soviets. Back when we were negotiating this thing called the Outer Space Treaty, they were, about to say, well, we can't militarize space, and the U.S. said no. Instead of saying militarization, we're going to say space should be used for peaceful purposes, and that's kind of the overriding arch of outer space activities. That space is used for peaceful purposes, and that doesn't exclude the military. Again, that's a whole different segue that I won't go down to because of our time. The second, what are we talking about with the PRC on the moon? Well, from the perspective of the PRC, and just to highlight my last point, the PLA, the PRC, Beijing, even the generals, the admirals, what have you, they don't think in terms of military objectives. They think in terms of political objectives. In other words, what is our ultimate political objective? So in that way, they've become very good students of Clausewitz and his observations about the nature of war itself. So in that context, what are we really talking about? We're talking about a concept called space control. A rough, very good definition. I wish I could quote her specifically. I don't have it in front of me, but space control is basically the ability of nation to operate freely in outer space, to perform its activities, but at the same time to deny the same to an adversary if it's in the national interest of a state. So bottom line is space control is our national interest to preserve freedom of access to low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, GEO, Lagrange points, cislunar space, and yes, the moon. Now, we see analogies to space control here on Earth, and the South China Sea has been appropriately brought up in this context. And I'll refer back to it again. And even though I hate comparing outer space to the terrestrial environment, I'm going to do it again, just because I don't think it's. But I digress. Basically, what's happening in the South China Sea is they're basically taking areas that are considered non-sovereignless, in other words, no nation owns it, and saying we own them. Well, how are they doing that? Well, they're occupying the space, and then they're justifying that through media, psychology, and creating legal arguments as to why. And when I talk about legal arguments, they use their culture to basically justify, saying, well, we've navigated these waters for thousands of years. These are ours, regardless of what a treaty says, like UNCLOS. These belong to us. And and in that way, they're trying to reshape the law through this three warfare strategy to actually do it. And just giving and for the audience, the three warfares is a concept that was developed by the CCP Central Committee back in I think around 2000, and they said to the PLA, this is the doctrine we want you to operate on. We want you not only to be strong militarily and have the ability to use force, but at the same time, we want you to be able to use the tools of public opinion through media, psychological warfare, and using the law to your advantage in order to achieve the political objectives of the Communist Party. So bottom line is this has been doctrine since 2003, and they've been using it incredibly effective in the South China Sea, and they're using it in outer space as well. The moon. I chose this image of the moon. I took that I think it was last year I took that. I love photographing the moon. It's prominent and it's out there. And after Artemis, I mean, it's even more intriguing and more inspiring. But we're talking about getting back to the moon. Well, we got to the moon and we went there in peace and we planted our flags and then we left for over 50 years. Now, people say, well, we've been there, done that. Obviously, the PRC has more long-term goals for the moon. And bottom line is, we were talking about they're getting their taikonauts there ahead of us, but really they've already begun weaving the legal foundation of actually making sovereign claims on the moon. In other words, doing a new South China Sea. The Chang'e 5, I believe, spacecraft landed on the dark side of the moon, as was previously mentioned, deployed a rover, and then it did a very interesting thing. The lander raised a Chinese communist flag. Very, very significant. And people, a lot of people said, "Oh, this is great. The Chinese have gotten to the moon. This is great for all mankind." Except that, that flag. What does that flag mean? And I asked a lot of people, "What does that flag mean?" And I got a lot of dumb looks about it. So a few years later, the Chang'e 6 probe landed in the Apollo basin on the bright side of the moon. It was a sample return mission. It collected samples, launched the return vehicle, and then it deployed a flag as well. And it's like, that's the second time they did it. What does that mean? And I actually posed this question to a group down in Arlington a few weeks ago. What does this mean? And everybody's comment was, well, the Americans did it. The Americans did it the same thing as Americans. No, you've got to understand what the flag the U.S. put on the flags the U.S. put on the moon did, and what the flags on the PRC did. Between Apollo 11 and Apollo 12, Congress got very itchy because Neil and Buzz put a flag on the moon, which wasn't part of the original mission architecture. It was just kind of, I thought, hey, we're going up there, we should put a flag on the moon. So they went to the hardware store, got the materials to erect a flag on the moon. Congress got worried about that, what that meant, because we signed this thing called the Outer Space Treaty back in 1967, which basically says no nation shall make a sovereign claim to the moon. Now, what does a flag usually indicate? It indicates a sovereign claim. This happened during the discovery area. The Chinese have done it in the South China Sea, planting their flag there and then building facilities. And after they built the islands, of course. So everybody presumed that was it. And Congress got really worried because it would be viewed as we're trying to claim the moon. So they passed a NASA Authorization Act before Pete Conrad and his crew went off to the moon. and basically said the implantation of the American flag on a celestial body, including the moon or any other celestial bodies, isn't an act of sovereignty, but rather an expression of national pride and technical achievement. Now, I'm paraphrasing what the law actually says, but that's federal law saying what that says. My question is, what do those two flags that have been raised on the moon by those two landers mean? Well, if we don't listen to what the Chinese say and see instead what they've done, my opinion, my non-legal opinion, is basically they're marking their territory, because they haven't only done it once, but they've done it twice. Now, right now they have the Chang'e 7, which is at the launch facility getting integrated onto the launch vehicle. That's going to land in the lunar south, and it's going to start looking for ice. I'll be very curious whether or not that lander raises a flag as well. So, bottom line is, we're talking, we got to get to the moon, and before the Chinese do, they're already there, and they're already signifying cultural claims. Indeed, the name of their spacecraft, Chang'e, U2. These are figures in Chinese mythology. The Chang'e being the Chinese goddess of the moon, and the Jade Rabbit, being her companion. So they're basically inculcating their culture into their lunar missions, and they're going to use this eventually to start making slowly claims based on their culture and history, and create the legal narrative that we can claim these patches. And it won't be, we conquer the moon all at once. It'll be little patches at a time, and it'll keep on growing unless we say, no, we object to that and push back on it. South China Sea, I hate to say it's a lost cause, but nothing short of a war is going to dislodge them from the South China Sea. So the best thing we can do is Band-Aid fix it and go over and over again. Now we have the opportunity right now to start pushing back even before Artemis, what is going to be 4, lands on the moon and puts the astronauts back on there, to say we disagree with this narrative. But this calls for more creative thinking within the administration, within the State Department, and getting engaged in this idea of lawfare, psychological warfare, and media warfare. Which I will tell you, in my responses to actually suggesting it has been, oh my God, that's reprehensible. We can't do that. The bottom line is we have to kind of hold our noses and say we got to do it, and we got to start doing it now with the moon, or else we're going to be in a situation, and perhaps 10 years down the road we're going to have another South China Sea on the moon. So again, framing this an idea of space control, that is a political objective of the Chinese government, and they're going to use they're going to use their military, they're going to use the legal aspect, the cultural, and the psychological aspects to accomplish it. Thank you.
Is that a real prospect here? And is it one that we should be factoring into our planning and preparations now?
I'm sure someplace in the Pentagon, somebody is thinking about this, and it's probably very classified, so it's definitely none of my business if that's the case. But I'm hoping we don't have to get to that point. And I think right now we're in a position, before they actually land taikonauts on the moon, we can start through narrative, political narratives, to basically promote this idea that, they signed the Outer Space Treaty. They did it in 1983, almost 20 years after everybody else, but they did sign it, and kind of hold their feet to the fire on that. I mean, the whole idea, for example, the whole Artemis thing was to test our equipment, to make sure it worked, make sure thankfully our astronauts got home alive. But it also had the effect that it captivated the entire world, and that was a big political coup for the U.S., because we didn't have just U.S. citizens on board that spacecraft. We had a Canadian citizen as well, and they framed it in the idea of everybody as opposed to just one nation. Powerful, powerful message. Now, if you're sitting in Beijing and say, how do I counter that? That's a powerful message. How do I counter that? I can't, it's going to be hard for us to go to the moon and make claims and say that it is, that it's ours exclusively and everybody stay out. On the other hand, they may just not care, which, and a lot of times they basically say, we don't care. We're going to do what we're going to do. We have our interests, and we're going to do it. We don't care what you think about it. Plain and simple. So I'm hopeful we don't get into a situation where we have to physically dislodge them, because that's going to be difficult, and from a public standpoint, that's going to be very unpalatable. And I don't want to get in a situation either where we're in the South China Sea. It's something we have to live with and kind of just, basically keep at bay as much as we can. But I think right now is the time through messaging. While we're getting our mission prepared, messaging, political statements in the UN, political statements abroad, even backroom conversations with Chinese officials saying, look, we know what you're doing, and we're not going to accept it. Hard, stern comments in the back room, out of the public eye, so they don't lose face, and basically say, we know what you're going to do. Forget about it. We're going to make sure you don't. My 2 cents.
Accepting another South China Sea fiasco is certainly not in my playbook, and it's just a tragic episode in U.S. national security history that Obama in particular permitted this to take place. Now we have a fait accompli. There's this instinct to somehow accept the status quo because it's too difficult and politically unpalatable to take them on and to dislodge them from these illegal structures. And here we are. Now that's what Chinese winning looks like, right? When we say, well, it's not worth the candle. That's not going to be the case in my book on space. If they want to play hardball up there, and they will, it's not a maybe, it's a certainty. This is a military mission for them. There's no goodness and mankind commons thinking going on here. It's a strategic advantage and how to basically take us out of the picture and our way of life and governance. So let's just remember who we're dealing with here. Now, fine. In short, Frank, let's put them out of business on the ground right now. Why? Admiral Harris, back in 2013, I wrote up a paper that identified every Chinese company and their subs that were publicly traded that were building the islands on the South China Sea. I can't quite remember the number, but it was a large number. We had the photographs. We had exactly what kind of dredging machines they were using, the whole thing, a very granular display, demonstrating that the American people's hard-earned retirement dollars were being funneled to these companies, which could be identified in the portfolios of their exchange-traded funds, their mutual funds. You could see them on MSCI's index list, the same with FTSE Russell, etc. They were in the BlackRock products, Vanguard, State Street, all clear as a bell. So Harry Harris, as I understand it, and again, I don't want to overstep here, but I had it on pretty good authority that he had the courage and the resolve to raise this with President Obama directly in a National Security Council session, and basically laid out the fact that we're picking up this tab. This is something we don't have to do. This can be a sanction. At least let's take these guys out of our capital markets, out of our private equity. Let's say no to not just listings, delistings. They're not allowed to trade here. We've got 5,000 Chinese companies, many of them PLA, being traded on our exchanges as we sit here today, right? So we're not making great progress on this. Let's take space, which every American cares about. It's embedded in their DNA. Let's take space and stop them here. There's no PLA-tied Chinese companies going to be listing or trading in the capital markets of the United States, period. And there's no private equity firms in the United States that are going to be permitted to finance these particular companies, which should be on the Pentagon list of Chinese military companies, but this time with teeth. So that's a start, Frank. And what about space sector capture? Let's go after let's contest all those countries that are being swallowed up and losing their space sector to the Chinese and Russians only because we're not there. Why don't we make a counteroffer? Why don't we try to bring them out of that orbit? Don't give the Chinese the numbers and the votes on the ground to be setting the terms for space in the future. So I could go on, and I'm sorry to be a little bit passionate about this, but I'm not going to sit here and think about the South China Sea being some kind of revisited event here. That's not going to happen on my watch.
You're a serious strategic thinker. You've got a background, of course, in the military as a Marine veteran, as well as a U.S. Army reservist. But in your post-military career, you've been involved in, strategic planning as well as program operations, notably in Iraq. After its liberation. What are your thoughts on this issue of the prospect that we're going to face a militarized moon in Chinese hands if they get there first? And the concerns that we've been discussing a little bit, as you know, that we would be enjoined from doing much about that, at least until presented with a very unpleasant reality.
First off, I want to apologize that I'm not doing the video. So I apologize for that because my interest today was to hear your guests on this particular subject. I grew up in the Apollo era. I grew up on all of that, Skylab and Voyager and Mercury and Gemini. I grew up in all that. And as you stated, I look at this issue from a geopolitical edge, and it really doesn't get the attention that these gentlemen have outlined. I think that it deserves, and it needs to be brought to the forefront. To me, when I look at it, and I'm trying to analyze it, and your guest really helped me with this. I look at a government military effort, the Chinese, versus a hybrid that we have now, which is mostly dominated by capitalist companies, billionaires that are running these massive space programs in conjunction with NASA. Who's going to win that battle? In my opinion, it's going to be, the hybrid military, the hybrid NASA and capitalist efforts that I see out of SpaceX and Bezos and a bunch of, there's so many, those are the ones who get the headlines, but there's so many others that are in this realm. I'm trying to watch it a little bit more closely and bring it into the geopolitical realm that we have here on celestial Earth, what we're doing, and extending that outwards, trying to analyze that. I really believe that, that our capitalist effort with NASA will outdo the Chinese. I think with our Artemis mission that we just did, we leapfrogged in front of them. They still haven't done that mission yet, and they're going to have to do that mission. And hopefully, the one thing that I'm really happy to see is actually this competition that NASA and the U.S. and our capitalist partners are having with China. To me, it's a driver.
Michael, your hopes behave according to form. And the purpose of those flags on the landers is what they will be doing if they get men with those flags in the future, namely staking claims at a minimum to parts of that lunar surface, if not the whole moon. Are we going to be capable of contending with that prospect, that they not only will have a physical control of water resources, for example, if they get there first, but that they well may be prepared to use whatever installations they put in place there for militarization of the moon more generally, and possibly with implications for cislunar space as well as the Earth itself. Could you guys just, lay out that scenario in the context of what should we be doing now, other than just jawing them into behaving better?
Well, it isn't just jawing them. It's a matter of being very explicit about what's going to happen. Look at tariffs. You can always play the tariff card. The tariff card has been extremely effective, especially against the Chinese, and you can always play that card. But you can also, again, it's the whole idea of psychological and media warfare. The president is extremely good at using his own invention, Truth Social, to basically lay out his agenda. He could potentially use that as a platform for getting out what he thinks about the moon. I mean, ultimately, it isn't a matter what does winning look like. What winning looks like to the U.S. is different from what winning looks like to the Chinese. So until we understand what winning is to the Chinese, and until we understand what winning looks like to us, we really can't win. So I think we have to have that discussion, and obviously these things will be classified. It's to keep things closed. But basically, what does winning on the moon look like to us? Does it mean excluding the Chinese? Does it mean keeping them in check on the moon? Does it mean us basically tolerating them on the moon? There is a nuclear option, which I won't discuss here, that we could use, which would be extremely unpalatable. But would that option be a option in the future? Because it would so be politically unpalatable. Again, I think it all goes back to what does winning look like on the moon.
As I've stated, I think we can begin right away by trying to defund the Chinese PLA-dominated space program in its entirety. That's something that could be done tomorrow. Not that it clearly will be, because of Wall Street resistance and those who are sympathetic to their views on the Hill and in the executive branch. They've been a very powerful force on this. That's why we're still having this discussion some 25 years after I began these very inquiries. So it's not a tomorrow thing, but it could be, in the sense that here we have PLA, Chinese military companies, having their offensive militarized space program directed against us on the moon and elsewhere. And that's the reality. And why we are picking up the tab is hard to fathom. It's pretty straightforward, Frank, really. We just need to take certain steps so that we are not, in effect, facilitating and indeed accelerating our own demise. Am I anxious to get into a situation up there that's more military? I mean, let's put it this way. What happened in the last 48 hours? We shoot into the engine room of a Chinese tanker. It might be Iranian flagged, but it just came out of China, filled with ammonium and sodium perchlorate, which is the chemical precursor for the Iranian missiles, of which the last shipment was estimated to have provided for 800 such missiles. This is a huge tanker. Just imagine what that would have looked like. So the Chinese are an enemy combatant in Iran. That's the simple bottom line, including the space assets being used by them to benefit the Iranians. So are we going to be in a situation, Frank, where that same tanker equivalent is headed to the moon with co-orbital direct descent missiles? Are we going to put 3 rounds into the engine room of that? Is it going to have to be that we actually interdict their efforts to build out a military presence? So I think that these may be a bit Hollywood to some, but sadly, we're closing on this very quickly. And I would bet a fair amount of money in the unnerving exchange that you were referencing the other day, Frank, that the Chinese do have something up their sleeves. I have a very sinking feeling on that. I do think they're going to try to get there in 28 or 29. And if we have a glitch, if we have even a modest delay, we're out of that particular game. And anybody, you can say we can play catch-up ball and rocket by them down the pike, but I'm afraid that the symbolism here is extremely stark. So those are my observations. But there are things we could do now if we were serious about this.